The sky above Mars was never quiet, but on that day it turned into something far more terrifying than anyone had ever seen. It was not the red dust storms that people feared. It was the sudden streaks of light tearing across the heavens, bright and violent, like fire raining down from space. Colonel Mason Hale stood inside the command deck of Fort Resolute, the largest human military base on Mars, and watched the chaos unfold on the wide viewing screen. The veteran Marine had fought in enough battles to know when death was coming, and this time it was not human. He stared at the incoming signals on the tactical display, hundreds of unknown ships moving in formation, approaching fast. Lieutenant Alvarez, his young second-in-command, tried to steady her voice as she reported the readings. No transponders, no familiar power signatures, nothing from Earth or its colonies. Whoever they were something new. Mason gave a single order in his calm, steady tone. Put it on screen. The image that filled the room made the entire crew fall silent. A fleet of black, blade-shaped ships filled the void, sharp and silent, gliding through space as if they owned it. The light from Mars's sun slid across their hulls like water over stone, and even through the screen they looked predatory. "Holy hell," Alvarez whispered. "They're not ours." Before Mason could reply, a transmission broke through the static. It was a strange mix of clicks, hisses, and mechanical tones that made no sense to the human ear. The translator AI struggled to make sense of it, then finally produced a cold, flat voice in English. "This world is annexed by the Dominion of Xylar. Submit your species for classification." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mason stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. He had fought pirates, rebels, even the icy winds of Europa. But this was different. He smirked faintly and muttered under his breath, "Good luck with that." A second later, the first beam hit. The sky lit up white. The entire base shook as if the planet itself had groaned in pain. Walls buckled, alarms screamed, and soldiers were thrown to the floor. Through the windows, Mason saw the horizon vanish under a storm of plasma fire. Whole sectors of the colony were gone, erased in a single strike. Alvarez shouted orders, trying to rally the panicked crews, but the sound of explosions drowned her voice. "Get those guns online!" Mason roared, pulling himself to his feet. "Power up every turret we've got. We're not going down without a fight." Outside, defense cannons rose from the surface like the spines of a wounded beast, firing back at the alien fleet. Blue beams cut through the Martian dust, hitting the enemy ships and exploding in bursts of light. For a brief moment, it looked as if the humans might hold their ground. But the Xylar's weapons were beyond anything human engineers had ever imagined. Each shot from their fleet tore through shields, melted armor, and left craters miles wide. The base became a battlefield. Marines poured into the corridors, loading rifles and shouting to each other through the chaos. Civilians ran for the bunkers, clutching children in gas masks, faces pale with fear. Over the intercom, Mason's voice boomed through the noise. "All units, this is Colonel Hale. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Hold your ground." "Repeat, hold your ground." His words steadied the troops. Even as the ground burned beneath their boots, the Marines formed firing lines, aiming their weapons at the descending drones. The air was filled with smoke and red dust, the smell of scorched metal and blood. Mason stood at the edge of the command platform, his armor scorched and cracked, watching the alien ships descend like a swarm of black birds. His heart pounded not with fear but with something older, defiance. Humanity had always fought impossible odds, and he would not be the first to break. He gritted his teeth and said quietly to himself, "If they want Mars, they're going to have to take it from us." And as the next wave of fire rained down, the battle for humanity's survival began. The battle for Mars turned into a nightmare that no one on the planet would ever forget. Within hours of the first attack, entire cities had been reduced to glowing ruins. The once proud colonies, filled with life and noise, became silent fields of dust and ash. Colonel Mason Hale and his Marines fought through the wreckage, their armor scorched and dented, their weapons hot from constant fire. The alien invaders, the Xylar, had filled the skies with black drones that moved like insects, swift, deadly, and endless. They crawled across the surface, cutting through metal, walls, and human flesh as if everything were made of paper. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic taste of fear. Mason's voice was hoarse from shouting orders, but he refused to stop. Every second mattered. "Keep moving," he yelled to his team as they ducked behind a collapsed transport ship. Lieutenant Alvarez ran beside him. Blood streaked across her cheek, but her eyes sharp. "Evac routes are gone, sir," she shouted over the explosions. Mason didn't hesitate. "Then we make our own," he barked. He lifted his railgun, aimed at the sky, and fired. The crackling shot tore through one of the drones, sending it spinning to the ground in a burst of flame. They were heading toward the comm tower, the last working link to Earth. If they could reach it, maybe they could warn the rest of humanity about what was coming. The path was nothing but rubble and chaos. They passed civilians huddled in broken buildings, eyes wide with disbelief. Some begged for help. Others just stared blankly at the fire raining from the heavens. Mason wanted to stop, but he couldn't. His mission was all that mattered now. He promised himself that if he lived through this, he would come back for them. The Marines sprinted through a corridor half filled with smoke and falling sparks. The ground trembled with every blast from above. Alvarez coughed, pulling her helmet tighter. "How are we supposed to fight something like this?" she muttered. Mason didn't look back. "We've fought worse," he said, though he knew it was a lie. When they finally reached the comm tower, it was already half destroyed. The antenna had collapsed and fire licked the edges of the control room. Mason pushed forward, searching for the relay core that might still be working. But as he turned a corner, a shadow moved through the smoke, a massive shape, tall and armored, blocking the path. A Xylar warrior stood before him, its body covered in black plates that shimmered like obsidian. Its eyes glowed with cold blue light, and in its clawed hands it held a blade that hummed with energy. "Human," it hissed through its translator. "Why do you resist? Your kind is weak." Mason stared at the creature, breathing hard. His mind flashed through every Marine he had seen fall that day, every colony burning, every scream over the radio. He raised his weapon slowly, his voice low and rough. "Weak, huh?" Then he threw a grenade. The explosion filled the corridor with white fire. The shockwave knocked both of them back. When the smoke cleared, the alien's armor was cracked open, its body twitching on the floor. Mason limped toward it, staring down at the creature. "You haven't met Earth's Marines," he said quietly. Then he raised his boot and crushed the alien's head beneath it. The relay flickered to life just long enough for a final message. "This is Colonel Mason Hale of Mars Base Resolute," he said into the mic. "We are under attack by unknown alien forces. The Dominion of Xylar. Mars is lost, but humanity is not. Tell Earth to prepare." Static filled the channel. The tower shook. Mason turned to Alvarez, who stood in the doorway, her face lit by fire. "We're done here," he said. "Let's move." They disappeared into the ruins as the comm tower collapsed behind them, the flames rising high into the dark red sky. Mars was gone, but Mason Hale was still alive, and somewhere deep inside a fire was building that no alien army could ever extinguish. 2 weeks after the fall of Mars, the war had spread like wildfire across the solar system. Earth cities, once glowing with lights and life, now burned under alien fire. The Dominion of Xylar had come in full force, confident that humanity would fall quickly, that this small and fragile species would surrender once faced with overwhelming power. They believed their technology, their fleets, and their armies would crush the humans without effort. But the Xylar had made a mistake, a fatal one. They had underestimated what humans became when they had nothing left to lose. Across the scattered colonies and ruined stations, people began to fight back. Soldiers, engineers, miners, even farmers, anyone who could hold a weapon joined the struggle. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't wait for rescue. They made their own war. The first sparks of resistance came from the survivors of Mars, led by Colonel Mason Hale, now a legend whispered among the broken forces of Earth. Those who fought beside him became known as the Ghost Battalion, a name the Xylar would soon learn to fear. They had no base, no nation, and no uniform army. They moved in shadows, striking supply lines, hijacking alien transports, and destroying Dominion outposts before vanishing into the dark. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in cunning and fury. Every attack they launched reminded the Xylar that humans would never kneel quietly. Mason had turned from a soldier into a ghost, a hunter in the ruins of a dying system. The Ghost Battalion's biggest mission came above Jupiter, where a massive Dominion dreadnought guarded one of the alien supply fleets. The humans had managed to capture a few enemy ships, barely learning to fly them. Mason led the strike himself, standing before his tired crew in the dim red light of the stolen transport. "Remember," he told them. his voice steady even as the deck shook with turbulence. "We're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting to show them what a cornered human can do." His words brought a spark of courage to the faces around him. They all knew they might not come back, but that didn't matter. Dying wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Giving up was. The boarding began in silence. Mason and his squad cut through the dreadnought's hull with plasma torches and slipped inside. The corridors were long and dark, humming with alien power. The air was cold and metallic, and the walls seemed to breathe. When the first Xylar patrol came into view, Mason didn't hesitate. His rifle roared, cutting down the aliens before they could even raise their weapons. The Marines moved like shadows, clearing room after room, their boots splashing through pools of glowing fluid from fallen enemies. They reached the ship's core, a massive chamber pulsing with blue light, the heart of the dreadnought's power. Mason stared at it, knowing what he had to do. "Plant the charges," he ordered. Alvarez hesitated for a moment, glancing at the readout. "Sir," she said, "if we blow this, we might not make it out." Mason gave her a faint, crooked grin. "Yeah," he said, "that's what makes it fun." They armed the explosives and started the timer. The alarms blared instantly as the ship's AI detected the threat. Drones and soldiers poured into the chamber, plasma bolts slicing through the air. The Marines fought back with everything they had, bullets clanging off metal walls, grenades shaking the floor. One by one they fell, holding the line until the timer reached its final seconds. Mason's visor cracked, his armor scorched, but he stayed standing until the end. Then the world turned white. From Earth, the explosion looked like a new star blooming beside Jupiter. The dreadnought shattered into 1,000 burning fragments, tearing through the rest of the fleet. Half of the Dominion's presence near Jupiter vanished in a single blinding flash. Humanity had struck back hard, and the universe finally took notice. The Dominion of Xylar, for all its power, had just learned that humans were not prey. They were predators who fought even after death, and Mason Hale was the ghost that would haunt them forever. The Dominion of Xylar could not understand the humans. They had faced many races across the stars, and none had ever resisted like this. Most species, when faced with the might of the Dominion, surrendered quickly, offering their worlds in exchange for survival. But the humans were different. Even when their cities were burning and their fleets destroyed, they fought harder. They fought with desperation, with fury, with something the Xylar had no word for. To them, it made no sense. The humans gained nothing by continuing the war. They only invited more pain, more loss, more death. Yet the more the Dominion crushed them, the more they rose. Entire colonies turned into battlefields where civilians fought beside soldiers. Children carried messages through ruins. Engineers turned mining lasers into weapons, and medics held rifles when the front lines broke. Humanity refused to vanish. They had lost Mars. They had lost half of Earth's orbit, but they had not lost their will. High Strategist Threx, one of the oldest minds in the Dominion, stood before a grand council of shimmering alien forms and tried to explain this mystery. "They do not act with logic," he said, his insect-like mandibles clicking in frustration. "They act with emotion. They fight as though war is their nature." The council murmured in disbelief. The overseer of Xylar Prime leaned forward, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Then make them stop. They must learn obedience." Threx hesitated. "We have tried, but every world we burn seems to give them strength. It is as if destruction feeds them." The overseer hissed, her patience thin. "Then erase them completely." The order went out, and fleets moved toward Earth. But before they could strike, something unexpected happened. A transmission from the humans reached the Dominion's communication network. It was a message from one man, Colonel Mason Hale. He had been captured during a failed raid on a Dominion convoy. His body was broken, his face bruised, but his spirit was unshaken. The aliens wanted to study him to understand what drove his kind. They brought him before the Dominion Council on Xylar Prime, where he stood chained in a hall of glass and light, surrounded by towering figures of the alien elite. The Supreme Overseer spoke through the translator, her voice cold and heavy. "Human, your kind is defeated. Your world burns. Why do you resist when surrender brings mercy?" Mason lifted his head slowly, meeting her gaze without fear. His voice was rough but steady. "You don't know what mercy means," he said. "And you sure as hell don't know what war means." His words echoed through the chamber, confusing the translators, shaking the silence. The overseer tilted her head, curious. "Explain, human. What is war to you?" Mason smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and pride. "War crimes," he said softly, "are what we do when we stop holding back." The overseer recoiled slightly, unsure if it was a threat or a confession. But the message was clear enough. It was not mercy the humans needed, and it was not fear that drove them. It was vengeance. The council ended the interrogation, but the word spread through the Dominion fleet like a dark whisper. The humans had something terrible in them, something that made even the conquerors hesitate. That night, under the crimson skies of Xylar Prime, the Dominion learned what those words truly meant. The Ghost Battalion, thought to be scattered, launched their boldest attack yet. Using captured Dominion ships and stolen access codes, they infiltrated the capital world's defenses and struck deep into the heart of the enemy. Explosions rippled through the alien cities, fire lighting up the horizon. From his prison cell, Mason heard the rumble of destruction and smiled through bloodied lips. His people had come for him, not just to rescue their leader, but to remind the Dominion of something they had forgotten. Humans didn't fight for territory or glory. They fought for each other, for memory, for the right to exist. And once they started fighting, they didn't stop. That night, the Dominion of Xylar finally understood what Mason Hale had meant. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they were afraid. The final battle began under a sky filled with fire. Above the alien homeworld of Xylar Prime, the stars were hidden behind the glow of hundreds of warships locked in combat. Human and Dominion fleets clashed in a storm of light, plasma beams, and railgun rounds cutting through the darkness like streaks of lightning. The airless void around the planet burned with wreckage and debris, ships breaking apart in silent explosions that lit up space like dying suns. Humanity had brought everything they had left, every surviving ship, every Marine, every ounce of courage they could muster. The Dominion had expected a weak final stand, but what they faced instead was madness, defiance, and human rage. At the center of it all was Colonel Mason Hale, standing on the bridge of his ship, the Resolute, his armor cracked, his body worn, but his eyes still bright with purpose. Around him, his crew worked through chaos, shouting over alarms as the ship shook under enemy fire. "Sir, shields are gone," Alvarez cried, gripping the console for balance. Mason didn't flinch. "Then we use grit," he shouted. "Aim for their flagship. If we go down, we take their heart with us." The Resolute charged forward through a wall of plasma fire. It was suicide, but Mason didn't care. He had seen too much, lost too much to turn back now. The hull groaned as the ship tore through. Debris, engines burning hotter than they were ever designed to. On every screen, warning lights flashed red, but the Marines on board kept fighting, manning cannons by hand when systems failed, patching holes in the hull with combat foam, shouting battle cries through the chaos. They were not soldiers anymore. They were fury made flesh. The Dominion ships surrounded them, sleek and deadly. But for every alien ship that fired, the Resolute answered with everything it had. The ship's railguns spat molten steel, punching through the enemy hulls, leaving trails of fire in their wake. The battle became a blur of light and noise, a storm that seemed to consume the entire sky. When the ammunition finally ran out, Mason made his decision. "We ram them," he said quietly. The bridge went silent for a heartbeat. Alvarez looked at him, disbelief in her eyes. "Sir, if we do that, we finish this," Mason cut in. "All of it." There was no hesitation after that. The Resolute turned sharply, its engines roaring as it aimed directly for the Dominion flagship, a massive vessel like a floating fortress, its surface glowing with energy shields and alien fire. The crew braced for impact. The soundless explosion that followed sent waves of debris spiraling across orbit. The two ships collided with a force that cracked the sky itself, metal tearing against metal as the human ship tore through the Dominion's defenses. The Marines stormed out through the burning wreckage, boarding the alien flagship amid the chaos. Mason led the charge, shotgun in one hand and combat knife in the other. The corridors were filled with smoke and sparks, the air thick with the stench of burning circuits and alien blood. The Dominion soldiers fought fiercely, but the humans were unstoppable. They had no fear, no mercy left. They fought their way to the throne chamber, where the Supreme Overseer waited, towering, armored, and surrounded by energy shields. Mason stepped forward, blood streaked across his armor, his breathing heavy. The Overseer looked down at him, her voice hissing through the translator. "You could have lived as allies," she said coldly. "You could have joined the Dominion." Mason stared back at her, eyes burning with fire. "Maybe," he said. "But you made one mistake." The Overseer tilted her head. "And what mistake is that, human?" Mason's voice was steady, filled with quiet pride. "You thought humans were harmless." Before the Overseer could respond, Mason pulled the pin on his last grenade. There was no fear in his eyes, only the calm certainty of a man who had done what he came to do. The explosion ripped through the chamber, engulfing them both in a storm of light. The blast tore through the flagship, shattering its core and setting, off a chain reaction that consumed the entire fleet. From orbit, it looked like a second sun blooming above Xylar Prime. The Dominion's armies burned, their ships crumbled, and their world began to fall. Humanity had won, not through strength of numbers or technology, but through sheer will, through the refusal to die quietly. And as the light faded, one truth echoed across the stars. The day the aliens met a Marine was the day they finally learned what war truly meant. When the fires of war finally faded, the galaxy was left in silence. The Dominion of Xylar, once the most powerful empire in known space, had fallen into ashes. Its fleets were gone, its capital burned, and its rulers wiped out in a single blinding act of defiance. The battle above Xylar Prime had ended everything. The light of the explosions had been seen from distant colonies, and for generations to come, that light would be remembered as the day humanity changed the course of the stars. In the ruins of the alien empire, what remained of the Ghost Battalion searched for survivors. The Resolute was gone, torn apart in the final blast, and Colonel Mason Hale was nowhere to be found. Some said he had died aboard the Dominion flagship, taking the Supreme Overseer with him. Others whispered that he had escaped at the last second, lost somewhere in the void. No one truly knew. What was certain was that his name had become more than human. It had become legend. The years that followed were not easy. The Earth that the survivors returned to was scarred and weary. Entire cities had been destroyed during the war. The oceans were darker. The skies still carried the faint shimmer of orbital wreckage, and millions of lives had been lost. Yet through all the pain, there was hope. Humanity began to rebuild, brick by brick, ship by ship. Every nation, every colony, every surviving settlement came together under one banner, not out of fear but out of pride. They had fought an enemy that ruled thousands of worlds and had survived. For the first time in history, humans were united, not by greed or territory, but by the memory of what they had endured together. On the ruins of Fort Resolute, the first human colony on Mars, they built a monument, a vast dark statue carved from Martian stone. It showed a Marine standing tall with his helmet under his arm, staring into the horizon as if watching over the worlds beyond. At the base, words were etched in steel. They thought we were weak. They learned what happens when we stop being kind. Every visitor who read those words felt a chill, a reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. Around the galaxy, the story of the war spread even among the alien species who had once feared the Dominion. The Xylars surviving. Races whispered the name Mason Hale like a curse and a prayer. They spoke of the human who had looked into the eyes of an empire and refused to bow, the man who had shown them what war really meant. For decades, the stars remained quiet. No alien fleet dared to approach human space. The Dominion's former world stayed dark and empty, their ruins serving as a warning, yet humanity did not stop there. They began to explore again, not as conquerors but as survivors. They built new colonies, stronger ships, and faster engines. They sent explorers beyond the edges of the old maps, carrying the story of Earth with them. Among the explorers was Alvarez, now a decorated captain who carried a small metal tag around her neck, the one that had once belonged to Mason. Every time she looked at it, she remembered his words, his defiance, his promise that humans would never be broken. Years later, far beyond the edge of human space, a deep space probe drifted silently through the void. It was one of the old Dominion sensors, still recording signals from across the galaxy. One day, it picked up a faint transmission coming from a human beacon. The message was short, simple, and unmistakably human. If you come in peace, we'll welcome you. If you come for war, remember what happened to the last ones who did. The signal spread across the stars, reaching even the most distant systems, a message carved in radio waves and human pride. It was a warning and a promise. Humanity had risen from the ashes, and though the galaxy had tried to break them, it had only made them stronger. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of light, the legend of Mason Hale lived on, carried in the hearts of every soldier, every explorer, every human who looked to the stars and remembered the Marine who taught the universe the true meaning of war.